Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today, which is about pluralism. What is pluralism? Well, according to Diana Eck at the Pluralism Project at Harvard, pluralism is not diversity alone, and it's not relativism. It's a way that we learn to live together, actively engaging with one another. I think in my career thus far, with a professor who was a chair of the Parliament of the World's Religions, having traveled somewhat in London, going to my first Islamic Student Association meeting back in the day as a part of a world religions class, I've recognized the ways that personally I've been stretched, I've grown, I've learned a lot, and I've been able to work with a large group of people because of pluralism. What does that mean to me? It means that I seek opportunities where I get to meet people who are different than I am so I can better understand them, and I can understand the ways that my neighbors think and act in the world around me. I notice that I'm wearing a Mr. Rogers sweater, and I think learning who's in our neighborhood, what they think, what they feel, what they hope, is the ways that it becomes a way that we're a good neighbor. And so somewhere between Mr. Rogers and Harvard professor Diana Eck, I wanted to share a little bit with you just what it means, according to her, somewhat according to me, to be in a pluralistic society. So if you wonder, how do you actively engage? How do you learn from people who are different than you? Maybe you stick around just a little bit longer. So how does the Pluralism Project at Harvard define pluralism? Well, first, pluralism is not diversity, at least not diversity alone. It's an energetic engagement with the people around us. Diversity comes on its own. You don't have to do anything to be a part of a diverse workplace, a diverse school, a diverse church. Simply by the identities of the people there, things are diverse. But to be engaged is something different. To seek after diversity, to seek to be inclusive of people from different places, people with different ideas, that requires effort on your part. How do we engage our neighbors, specifically the ones who are different than we are, whether that's by identity or gender or sexual orientation or religious belief or this, that, or the other thing? We engage them by rubbing shoulders with them, getting to know them, and finding things that we hold in common so that what we hold in common allows us to explore the places where we're not common. It's not necessary that I check off every political belief of the people that I play basketball with, at least pre-COVID. I don't know how deep your political conversations are in your bowling leagues, but by holding something in common that you enjoy together, whether that's food or sport or a reading group, soup group, these are the places where you can start to rub shoulders and enjoy the lives of other people. Because regardless of political affiliation, regardless of religious creed, certain things come to the surface like stress at work, wondering about your kids and their grades. And by holding something in common, it allows us safely to explore the places where we are different. So pluralism is not diversity alone, but an active engagement, an active seeking out of the differences that exist in and around us. Secondly, pluralism is not simply toleration. Tolerate is something I did whenever I shared a room with my younger brother. It never meant anything good. I barely tolerated his leaving his stuff on the floor, his playing with my things. Tolerance only comes from people in power, and tolerance is something those in power do to people with less power. If we seek to be a pluralistic society, if we seek to be cosmopolitan sorts of people, then pluralism means something beyond mere tolerance. It means advocating for understanding among people and advocating for equity among people. It means that we seek to do the things that bring people closer to a commonality, where everyone's voice matters and everyone's personhood is dignified. Tolerance is too weak a word, anemic a word, for what I think the founding of America stands for, where we, the people, should not be defined as this tightly held group. It means something larger than that. It's a beacon of hope, justice, and liberty for all people, regardless of creed or color or gender. So, if we seek to be pluralistic people, cosmopolitan sorts, that means that we have to move beyond tolerance into an active seeking of understanding for what our neighbors are, who they are, and what they think. Thirdly, pluralism is not relativism. You might wonder what relativism is. It can seem, I've been in classes and rooms like this, where when people don't hold strongly to their own commitments, it seems that anything goes. Everything is simply academic, and it's hard to tell what really matters, where people are convicted, where people fight or stand up for a certain cause. So on the one hand, relativism seems to say that anything goes, which probably is not where you would want to be. There are things, I imagine, that you have fought hard to understand, that you advocate for, that you stand up for. And simply saying that those things don't matter because people think differently, I don't advocate in that way for that sort of relativism. On the other hand, if everyone is uncompromising, staunch in conviction, and they would fight to the mat or fight to the death about every minor point of their theology or philosophy or what have you, then we're constantly at war with one another. Pluralism seeks to hold these two things together, conviction and civility. How can we come together in our commitments, even if those commitments are in fact different? I know that when I was growing up, being a good Southern Baptist boy that I was, one of the things that people advocated was that I would not drink or play cards. I have to admit, now that I'm Presbyterian, I have once or twice enjoyed a drink over a game of poker. It's not the worst thing. In fact, I would advocate for certain times when you're able to let loose and relax that way, because as a Presbyterian, we know grace covers a multitude of sins. So what do we stand up for? Can we allow spaces for us to have different sorts of commitments so that for people who don't want to play cards and don't want to drink and don't want tobacco and don't want, how do we understand others who do want? Can we come together to have equal exchanges in both of our commitments, knowing that they're diametrically opposed? In a democracy, in a church, in an office, those things happen. Learning how to understand one another, to actively engage with our commitments, is the true test of how cosmopolitan we might be. It's not relativism, it's not anything goes. It's an understanding of ourselves and others that we might be equally committed on different sides of issues. How do we learn as a neighborhood to make space for that? Fourthly, and this might seem minor, pluralism in the way that the Harvard Pluralism Project talks about it is based on dialogue. None of this exists in a vacuum. It's not the case that we can be engaged in pluralism, seeking to understand others, if we never dialogue with people who are different than we are. Now, I think at some level, reading, documentaries, those count at some level as dialogue. People record what they think and say, and you take the time to listen. But unfortunately for me, I don't always get to hear your pushback, what you think about the things I say. To be a sort of community, to be a sort of church that values multiple opinions, dialogue is essential. To be pluralistic, to be a big tent, to be purple where red and blue mix. Dialogue and learning how we dialogue, where our civic engagements meet, our commitments come together, we learn to disagree. All of that happens as we learn to talk with one another. And it's wonderful that in the church, where we disagree, the thing that we hold in common is Jesus Christ, the Spirit that leads us, so that we can have debate and we're held together always in God's love. That's the kind of church, that's the kind of neighborhood, that's the kind of world that personally I would want to live in. A pluralistic one, where my voice matters, but so does yours. And learning how we both express our voices and both listen deeply to one another, I think that's the goal. I appreciate that you listened to me this morning. I'd love to hear your feedback if you send me an email or give me a phone call. And if you don't do that, I'll see you next Monday.